With the anticipation and release of the S23 Ultra, a lot of people are excited, but a lot of people are also disappointed. But if you are excited, I'll have exclusive pre-order links down below, which saves you guys $150 off of the S23 Ultra, in addition to the trade-in value and everything else you get, including the free memory upgrade from Samsung by using the link below. If you guys want, check it out. Samsung was always known for making the best possible version of their phone. It worked because I was an Apple fanboy forever, dude. You couldn't pay me to use a Samsung phone because that actually happened. A friend of mine actually paid me to use the Note 2 or Note 3. I couldn't stop throwing up. So I'm like, all right, never doing that in my life again. That's until the S10 Plus came out. The S10 Plus, in general, the S10 series, but more so the S10 Plus, was always regarded, even today, as one of the best Android phones, especially one of the best Samsung phones. So that goes to show Samsung was always dedicated to make the best version of their phone, even if it meant putting in 8K recording into the S20, which was just an unbearable, shaky, cropped-in mess. At least they got the bragging rights. We got 8K video. But even if we talk about Samsung's marketing of the 100 times space zoom, which they were so proud about, they felt like they needed to print it on the back of the camera housing. But then when you actually used the 100 times space zoom, it looks like baked beans. It just seems like there were bigger upgrades in Samsung phones even year over year. Even if the updates didn't really matter much, they were still updates. But now it seems like in the past few years, Samsung keeps stepping back and then forward again and then back again. Then it's like, what? What's going on? For example, not many people know this, but Samsung already had a 1 terabyte phone with the S10 Plus, which by the way, I got it. That was the first official Samsung phone that I absolutely fell in love with. And in fact, a lot of iPhone people switched over to it. Even a lot of my friends before I even became like a big YouTuber, you know? And the crazy part is it had a micro SD card, so you could even expand that further all the way to 1.5 terabytes locally. That's nuts. But then a year later, Samsung released the S20 Ultra, which is supposed to be better than the Plus phones that they had going on back then, but that only went up to 512 gigabytes. So they actually went back on space, which I don't think I've ever seen a company do. Even the RAM got a decrease. The S21 Ultra went up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, but the S23 Ultra, the new one, only goes up to 12 gigabytes of RAM. Again, I don't know a single company that went back on RAM. I mean, imagine if Apple, when the iPhone 15 comes out, Apple's like 2 gigs of RAM. People are still going to buy it though. Hey, let's go. The point I'm trying to make is that Samsung was always known as the brand to really push into the realm of crazy and just completely wild. But now it seems like they've kind of calmed down. So what happened? On paper, the S23 Ultra is basically the S22 Ultra with a better camera, a better processor. That's it. Honestly, I mean, if you take a look at the spec sheet, it seems like they're basically the same phone. Where are all the crazy Samsung innovations and just the wildness of Samsung? It seems to be gone. Also, if we take a look at the pre-order and trade-in deals for Samsung in the past, they were basically begging you to buy their phone. They were giving you upwards of $1,000 for your used phone. I mean, if you're trading in a Samsung phone from the year prior, they were giving you up to $1,000, $900. The weirdest part is, even if your phone had a cracked display, Samsung was still like, we'll take it. Full price, we'll take it. They weren't even like giving you a lesser trade-in value, regardless if your phone was in tip-top condition or completely cracked out of its mind. And I'm not talking about that kind of crack. But this year, the maximum you're getting, even with a Samsung phone, is $750. But that's only for the Fold 4, which, might I remind you, is an $1,800 phone that came out, 6 months ago? So a phone that's 6 months old that used to cost $1,800, you're now possibly, if you want, you could trade it in for only $750. In fact, Samsung has given you more trade-in value for iPhones than their very own Samsung phones, which never used to be the case. So what's going on? Has Samsung completely lost their minds? Or is it for a different reason? I strongly believe these phones, including the iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 14 and Pro and whatever Ultra phone, whatever phone that is coming out from a big company today, I strongly believe it is a stopgap for the next generation of smartphones. I believe the next generation of smartphones is going to be more capable for AR, because if we take a look at your typical smartphone today, there's not much companies can really change about the phone, because we've already reached like the peak smartphone. We already have a full screen display. Well, you can't get more full screen than full screen. So upgrading the display is already out of the question, unless you maybe raise the refresh rate. But honestly, 120 hertz is really good enough. I mean, anything else, that's just overkill. So the display, out of the question. Let's talk battery. Well, that's kind of out of the question too. I mean, unless you make a thicker phone, but then people are going to complain, asking for it to be thin. Then next year, a thin phone comes out, then people complain that the battery life isn't good. So it's like a non-stop circle. There's just not much companies can do to keep dramatically changing their phone every year or every 2 years, at least not with the phone being in its current rectangular state. Samsung tried something new by creating a foldable phone and a flipping phone, but still there are a ton of people that aren't really interested in them. It's either too thick or maybe not really comfortable to use one-handed, or maybe something like the Flip 4, which people they don't really want to have to open up the phone every single time they want to use it. So there are still a lot of people that prefer a rectangular phone, but then they're not really upgrading every year because there's just not a lot of upgrades. Now, does this mean that the S23 Ultra is a bad phone? Does this mean that it is not an upgrade? Absolutely not. It is an upgrade, even from the S22 Ultra. We've already seen camera comparisons between the S23 Ultra and the iPhone 14 Pro, and Samsung has dramatically increased their video quality to the point where it looks better than the iPhone in many scenarios, which I honestly, I didn't think that was going to be a thing anytime soon. But there are other upgrades that will actually help you in day-to-day life, such as the faster RAM on the S23 Ultra. You have Bluetooth 5.3 compared to 5.2 from last year. The S23 Ultra also has a larger and more powerful vapor chamber for cooling when compared to last year's phone. And of course, the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which, I mean, we've already seen battery comparison tests with the S23 Ultra and the iPhone 14 Pro. I mean, they're on par. The S23 Ultra is on par with the iPhone 14 Pro Max in battery comparison tests. And if we compare the S23 Ultra to the S22 Ultra, I mean, that is a really big change. And if you live overseas in Europe, Asia, wherever else, you now have Snapdragon worldwide. No more Exynos, at least not this year, which is a great thing because a lot of people did not like Exynos. So if you're waiting for a Snapdragon phone to be, or at least a Snapdragon Samsung to be available in your region, well, now's the time. So to answer the question, what's going on with Samsung? The truth is, nothing. They're actually following the pattern that works. They know that they don't need to upgrade the phone with some wild new gimmick that people are just going to forget about. You remember AR Doodle? Yeah, how often have you used that? Once? Probably, most of you probably don't even know what that is. And you know what? You're lucky because it's such a stupid feature. Why did that even need to be in the presentation keynote for Samsung? How is that a selling point, you know? But whatever. Thank God people forgot about it. And thank God Samsung is now doing, they're keeping things simple, but a decent upgrade. No more gimmicks. It's just straight up raw horsepower. And most importantly, people, stop upgrading every year. That's completely useless. You're not really going to get a huge upgrade year over year, at least not in today's current smartphone form. They've already gotten as good as they're possibly going to get without really any huge changes year over year. The S23 Ultra is a decent upgrade even from the S22 Ultra. Now, do I think if you have the S22 Ultra, you should do whatever it takes to get the S23 Ultra? No, if I were you, I would wait about 6 months, wait for the prices to drop, and then you could probably pick up a used one for a really good deal. But also, if you have the S21 Ultra or older, I would upgrade. hands down. Even if I was not a tech YouTuber, I personally would upgrade. I mean, the S21 Ultra has a Snapdragon 888. That chip gets hot. Battery life is bad. And no matter how good your phone is, if the battery life is crap, well, you can't really, you're kind of afraid to use the phone because you're constantly worried about the battery. So the S23 Ultra fixes that. So something to consider. And again, I'll have a link down below if you guys are interested. The S23 Ultra, I do have it on pre-order, and the S23 Plus, so I'm going to be making a ton of videos on that, and I think both of them are going to be a fantastic phone that sells a lot. So how many of you are picking up the S23 series of phones? Let me know down below, because I'm kind of curious to see what the general public thinks about these phones, because, you know, we're tech people, and we have a really skewed reality, or skewed view on reality. So I'm kind of curious what the majority of people are thinking about these phones, not just tech geeks. You get it? Right. And that's it. If you guys enjoyed today's video, definitely click that like. It's completely free to you, and everyone likes free, but it helps me and the channel out a lot, and I always truly appreciate it. And if you're new here and you like these types of videos and a lot more videos on the S23 Ultra and S23 Plus coming out, then subscribe. Again, totally free, and it helps me out, and I don't cry at night. I don't know where I was going with that. I forgot this is not therapy. So anyway, hope you guys have a good day, and that's it. This was Mark from Mark's Tech. Adios.